as he thought this morning up there among the bushes. Oh, he knew how it must end. He saw that those dogs of Arabs were cutting down a tree to make a bridge across that deep stream and get round to the high ground at the back of you, whence they would have shot you all in 5 minutes. And now, Baas, my stomach feels very queer. There was no breakfast on the hillside and the sun was very hot. I think that just one tot of brandy, oh, I know I promised not to drink, but if you give it to me the sin is yours, not mine." Well, I gave him the tot, a stiff one which he drank quite neat, although it was against my principles, and locked up the bottle afterwards. Also I shook the old fellow's hand and thanked him, which seemed to please him very much, for he muttered something to the effect that it was nothing, since if I had died he would have died too, and therefore he was thinking of himself, not of me. Also 2 big tears trickled down his snub nose, but these may have been produced by the brandy. Well, we were the victors, and elated as may be imagined, for we knew that the few slavers who had escaped would not attack us again. Our first thought was for food, for it was now past midday and we were starving. But dinner presupposed a cook, which reminded us of Sammy. Stephen, who was in such a state of jubilation that he danced rather than walked, the helmet with a bullet hole through it stuck ludicrously upon the back of his head, started to look for him, and presently called to me in an alarmed voice. I went to the back of the camp, and staring into a hole like a small grave, that had been hollowed behind a solitary thorn tree, at the bottom of which lay a huddled heap, I found him. It was Sammy to all appearance. We got hold of him, and up he came, limp, senseless, but still holding in his hand a large thick Bible bound in boards. Moreover, in the exact centre of this Bible was a bullet hole, or rather a bullet which had passed through the stout cover and buried itself in the paper behind. I remember that the point of it reached to the first book of Samuel. As for Sammy himself, he seemed to be quite uninjured, and indeed after we had poured some water on him, he was never fond of water, he revived quickly enough. Then we found out what had happened. "Gentlemen," he said, "I was seated in my place of refuge, being, as I have told you, a man of peace and enjoying the consolation of religion." He was very pious in times of trouble. "At length the firing slackened, and I ventured to peep out, thinking that perhaps the foe had fled, holding the book in front of my face in case of accidents. After that I remember no more." "No," said Stephen, "for the bullet hit the Bible, and the Bible hit your head and knocked you silly." "Ah," said Sammy, "how true is what I was taught that the book shall be a shield of defence to the righteous. Now I understand why I was moved to bring the thick old Bible that belonged to my mother in heaven, and not the little thin one given to me by the Sunday school teacher, through which the ball of the enemy would have passed." Then he went off to cook the dinner. Certainly it was a wonderful escape, though whether this was a direct reward of his piety, as he thought, is another matter. As soon as we had eaten, we set to work to consider our position, of which the crux was what to do with the slaves. There they sat in groups outside the fence, many of them showing traces of the recent conflict, and stared at us stupidly. Then of a sudden, as though with one voice, they began to clamour for food. "How are we to feed several hundred people?" asked Stephen. "The slavers must have done it somehow," I answered. "Let's go and search their camp." So we went, followed by our hungry clients, and, in addition to many more things, to our delight found a great store of rice, mealies, and other grain, some of which was ground into meal. Of this we served out an ample supply together with salt, and soon the cooking pots were full of porridge. My word, how those poor creatures did eat! Nor, although it was necessary to be careful, could we find it in our hearts to stint them of the first full meal that had passed their lips after weeks of starvation. When at length they were satisfied, we addressed them, thanking them for their bravery, telling them that they were free, and asking them what they meant to do. Upon this point they seemed to have but one idea. They said that they would come with us, who were their protectors. Then followed a great indaba, or consultation, which really I have not time to set out. The end of it was that we agreed that so many of them as wished should accompany us till they reached country that they knew, when they would be at liberty to depart to their own homes. Meanwhile we divided up the blankets and other stores of the Arabs, such as trade goods and beads among them, and then left them to their own devices, after placing a guard over the foodstuffs. For my part I hoped devoutly that in the morning we should find them gone. After this we returned to our boma just in time to assist at a sad ceremony, that of the burial of my hunter who had been shot through the head. His companions had dug a deep hole outside the fence and within a few yards of where he fell. In this they placed him in a sitting position with his face turned towards Zululand, setting by his side two gourds that belonged to him, one filled with water and the other with grain. Also they gave him a blanket and his two assegais, tearing the blanket and breaking the handles of the spears to "kill them," as they said. Then quietly enough they threw in the earth about him and filled the top of the hole with large stones to prevent the hyenas from digging him up. This done, one by one, they walked past the grave, each man stopping to bid him farewell by name. Mavovo, who came last, made a little speech, telling the deceased to "namba kachle," that is, go comfortably to the land of ghosts, as, he added, no doubt he would do who had died as a man should. He requested him, moreover, if he returned as a spirit, to bring good and not ill fortune on us, since otherwise when he, Mavovo, became a spirit in his turn, he would have words to say to him on the matter. In conclusion he remarked that as his, Mavovo's snake, had foretold this event at Durban, a fact with which the deceased would now be acquainted, he, the said deceased, could never complain of not having received value for the shilling he had paid as a divining fee. "Yes," exclaimed one of the hunters with a note of anxiety in his voice, "but your snake mentioned 6 of us to you, O Doctor." "It did," replied Mavovo, drawing a pinch of snuff up in his uninjured nostril, "and our brother there was the first of the 6. Be not afraid, the other 5 will certainly join him in due course, for my snake must speak the truth. Still, if anyone is in a hurry," and he glared round the little circle, "let him stop and talk with me alone. Perhaps I could arrange that his turn—" Here he stopped, for they were all gone. "Glad I didn't pay a shilling to have my fortune told by Mavovo," said Stephen, when we were back at the boma. "But why did they bury his pots and spears with him?" "To be used by the spirit on its journey," I answered, "although they do not quite know it. These Zulus believe, like all the rest of the world, that man lives on elsewhere." End of Chapter 7.